I sat there, the sound of laughter ringing in my ears as they mocked me openly, while I sat alone, ignored as if I were invisible. It should have been the happiest day of my life, my son's wedding. A day full of promises of joy, a celebration of love. But instead I was placed beside the trash can. And they laughed. It wasn't the first time they had humiliated me. Not by a long shot. It had been happening for years, but it was on that day, surrounded by family and friends, that the betrayal hit me the hardest. Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, had made sure of it. She had smiled at me, a wide grin of victory, as she carefully positioned me beside the trash. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell them how they had hurt me, but I didn't. Instead, I sat there in silence, forcing a smile, pretending it didn't matter. But deep inside, I felt the sting. My son John didn't even look my way. Not once. I had raised him, given him everything I had, and this was how I was treated. I watched him as he mingled with his new wife's family, laughing and celebrating as though I wasn't even there. The longer I sat in that seat, the more I realized how much I had been pushed aside in my own family. They didn't need me. Not anymore. I had spent years giving, loving, sacrificing. And now I was nothing more than an afterthought. I could feel the bitterness rise in my throat, but I kept it down. There was no point in making a scene. Not today. I stayed quiet, hoping it would all pass. But deep inside, I knew something had to change. This time I wasn't going to let them win. I sat there, the empty chair beside me mocking me, as the laughter filled the air around me. My son's wedding should have been the highlight of my life. A day to celebrate his happiness and the new chapter in his life. But instead I was relegated to the edge like an afterthought. The trash can beside me was a cruel reminder of how far I had fallen in their eyes. I thought of all the years I had spent raising John, giving him everything I had, watching him grow up to become the man he was. Now, but where was he when I needed him? He was too busy with Rebecca, lost in her world, oblivious to the one person who had always been there for him. Rebecca's words echoed in my mind, the way she had spoken to me earlier in the day, her tone cold and dismissive. She hadn't even tried to hide her contempt. She had made it clear I wasn't welcome. I had been pushed aside so easily. She had been the one to take my place in his life. And John, my own flesh and blood, had allowed it. As I sat there trying to hold back the tears, I felt the weight of my years of sacrifice for this family. Was it all for nothing? I had given everything only to be treated like this. I could feel my chest tighten as the anger bubbled inside of me, but I didn't react. Not yet. I knew that the moment I raised my voice, they would just laugh at me, call me dramatic and dismiss my feelings. That's how they had always treated me, as if my emotions didn't matter. But something had shifted inside me. I wasn't going to be their punching bag any longer. I had stayed silent for so long, letting them walk all over me. But not anymore. I stood up from the table, ignoring the laughter and the stares. I walked out of that reception hall, not looking back. It was time to make things right, even if that meant fighting for my place in this family. I had nothing left to lose, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The drive home was long and quiet, but I wasn't thinking about the road. My mind was racing with the events that had unfolded earlier. The laughter, the trash can, Rebecca's smug expression, my son's indifference. It all played over and over in my mind, each replay deepening the wound. I felt the tears I had held back slowly start to well up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not now. Not when I had finally made the decision to stop being their doormat. I knew things had changed in my family, but it wasn't until today that I realized just how far I had fallen from their lives. I had spent years supporting John, attending every family event, helping with his kids, and putting his needs above my own. But where was he when I needed him most? He couldn't even stand up for me when his wife was humiliating me right in front of everyone. I thought of the countless times I had stayed silent, letting Rebecca take the spotlight, letting her dominate every conversation, every family gathering. I had been too afraid of causing a scene, too afraid of being labeled the dramatic mother-in-law, the overbearing parent. But now I was done. No more silence. No more being ignored. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw my house in the distance, the place I had built with my late husband. It felt foreign now, like a place where I didn't belong. I got out of the car and walked inside, but nothing felt the same. The walls, the furniture, the photos, everything seemed to mock me. It was as if the house was reminding me of everything I had lost, everything I had sacrificed for a family that no longer cared. I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands trembling slightly as I thought about the next steps. I had always been the one who put everyone else first, but now it was my turn to think about myself. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I wasn't sure how I would even begin to confront them, especially John. But I had made up my mind. I was going to get what I deserved even if I had to fight for it. I wasn't going to let Rebecca win. I wasn't going to let them push me out of my own family. The next morning, I woke up to the quiet of the house. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. Everything felt still, almost unnervingly so. I sat up in bed and looked around. This was my life now. It had always been my sanctuary, but today it felt like a prison. The emptiness was suffocating. I could still hear the laughter from the night before echoing in my ears, and it made my stomach turn. I didn't know how long I could keep pretending that everything was fine, but I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not when I had spent my whole life making everyone else's dreams come true while sacrificing my own. It was time for me to fight for myself. I needed answers. I needed to understand what had happened to my family. I had raised John to be strong, kind, and loving, but somehow over the years, he had been manipulated by Rebecca. He had allowed her to take over, to control everything. How had it happened so quietly? How had I not seen it sooner? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that there was more going on beneath the surface. I couldn't just sit around anymore, waiting for them to come to their senses. I needed to take action. I needed to start making moves even if they didn't like it. I grabbed my phone and began making calls. First, I contacted a lawyer. I had no idea what I was entitled to, but I knew that my rights had been trampled on. Then I reached out to a few old friends, people who had known John when he was younger before Rebecca came into the picture. They all said the same thing: John had changed. He wasn't the same person I had raised. And neither was Rebecca. She had always been so sweet at first, but now she was something else entirely. I couldn't help but feel the weight of the betrayal. My own son and daughter-in-law were working against me. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but I wasn't going to let them win. I didn't know exactly how I would fight back, but I was done being the quiet, invisible mother. It was time for me to reclaim my life. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, but something inside me had shifted. I no longer felt like the victim, the one who had been discarded. I was done with feeling powerless. I had spent so many years pretending that everything was fine, pushing my own needs aside for the sake of my family. But now I realized that I had been wrong to let things go on this way. I had let Rebecca manipulate not just my son but also me. She had made me feel like I didn't belong, like I was nothing more than a guest in my own home. But I wasn't a guest. I was his mother. And it was time for me to take my place back. I started making changes, small ones at first. I began to handle my own finances, something I had let my late husband manage for years. I had always trusted him, but now I was realizing that I had been living in a bubble. I needed to be more self-sufficient. I needed to know what was going on in my life, what I was entitled to, and how I could protect myself. One afternoon, I sat down with the lawyer I had contacted earlier. She was patient and listened as I explained everything, from my son's behavior to the way Rebecca had manipulated me over the years. The lawyer took notes and assured me that I had options. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't powerless. I was entitled to more than I had been given credit for, and it was time for me to stand up for myself. That evening I called John. My hands shook as I dialed his number, but I knew I had to do it. I couldn't keep avoiding the confrontation. He answered the phone with a tone that was too casual, too indifferent. "Hey Mom. What's up?" His voice didn't sound like the son I had raised. I could hear Rebecca in the background, her voice too loud, too present. I tried to keep my voice steady as I said, "John, we need to talk. It's time for you to hear the truth." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he responded. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything I had kept bottled up for so long. "I know what's been going on, John. I know how Rebecca has been manipulating you, and I can't stand by and let it happen anymore. I won't let you push me out of your life." The line was silent for a moment, and then John spoke, his voice shaky. "Mom, I didn't mean to hurt you. It's just, things have changed. I felt the anger flare up inside me, but I didn't let it consume me. I had learned to be calm in the face of everything Rebecca and John had done. Things have changed, yes, I said, my voice firm. But not in the way you think. You're not going to push me aside anymore. I'm not going to let you or Rebecca take what's rightfully mine. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions, but I was determined to stay calm. I had already made my decision. The confrontation with John had been a turning point, but I knew that the hardest part was still ahead. I couldn't just walk away from everything I had built with my late husband. This house, these memories, they were mine. And it was time to fight for them. I had to get organized, figure out how to move forward. I contacted the lawyer again, scheduling a meeting to go over my options. It was strange sitting in that office, looking at the papers laid out before me. The life I had lived for so many years suddenly felt fragile, like a house of cards that could come tumbling down. But the truth was, I wasn't going to let it fall without a fight. As I sat there, the lawyer explained my rights in detail, reminding me that I wasn't powerless. I had a claim to the estate, to the property, and more importantly, to the respect I had been denied for so long. The words felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control. That evening, I sat alone at the dinner table. The house was quiet, too quiet. It was the same silence I had come to dread. The silence that always came after one of John's dismissive conversations or one of Rebecca's cold, cutting remarks. I couldn't remember the last time we had shared a meal without some sort of tension in the air. But I wasn't going to let that silence control me anymore. I started to plan. I went through the family's financial records, reviewing every detail, every transaction. I was shocked at what I found. Money that had been moved around, properties that had been sold without my knowledge, decisions made without my consent. They had been slowly trying to push me out, to erase me from the picture. But I wasn't going to let them. The next morning I packed my things. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew that I couldn't stay in a place where I wasn't wanted. I left a note for John, telling him I would be staying with a friend for a while. It wasn't a goodbye, but it was a statement. I wasn't going to be treated like an afterthought anymore. I was going to take my life back piece by piece. I didn't know how long this fight would take, but I was ready. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a purpose again. I wasn't just a mother or a grandmother. I was Helen Marshall, and I was going to reclaim what was mine. The days after I left felt strange. The house, once filled with the sounds of family, was eerily silent. I stayed with my old friend Margaret, who had been supportive throughout this whole ordeal. It was her quiet encouragement that had helped me find the courage to leave. She told me that I was strong enough to stand up for myself, but I wasn't sure. I spent the first few days in a haze, sorting through everything. The lawyer had told me that I needed to take back control, and I was ready. I wasn't just fighting for property or money. I was fighting for the dignity that had been stripped away from me over the years. I went through my old paperwork, pulling out every document I could find related to the house, to the estate, to everything that I had been pushed aside from. I was shocked to discover that there were things I didn't know, things my son and daughter-in-law had kept from me. Money transfers. Accounts that had been opened without my knowledge. It felt like a punch to the gut, but at the same time it fueled me. I couldn't let them get away with it. As the days went by, I started to make more concrete plans. I contacted a private investigator to look into the finances. I needed proof that Rebecca and John had been taking advantage of me. The investigator, Tom, was thorough. He went through every detail, cross-referencing bank statements, emails, and contracts. He told me that there was a clear pattern. Rebecca had been siphoning money from joint accounts, funneling it into private accounts. It wasn't just money, it was trust, a betrayal of everything I had believed in. But I wasn't going to let them have the last word. I made an appointment with a family attorney, someone who could help me understand my legal rights. The attorney's office was cold and professional, but it gave me a sense of control I hadn't had in a long time. The lawyer explained that I was entitled to a portion of everything John had inherited, everything that had been bought with his father's hard work. They had no right to keep me out of it. But the hardest part was still ahead. I knew that confronting my son would be difficult. How could I face the person I had raised, the person I had loved, when he had turned against me so completely? I thought of all the years I had spent being there for him, all the sacrifices I had made. And now he was complicit in this betrayal. But I wasn't going to back down. I was going to make them face the consequences of their actions. For the first time in a long time, I felt a fire inside of me. A fire that I hadn't realized was still burning. I was ready to take back what was mine. The day I had been dreading finally arrived. It was time to confront my son John. I had been putting it off for so long, telling myself that I didn't need to. But deep down I knew I couldn't move forward until I did. I had done everything for him, but now it was time to stand up for myself. I had spent years being the quiet, supportive mother, never questioning his decisions, never standing up for myself. But all that had changed. I had found the courage to speak up, and now there was no turning back. I took a deep breath and called him. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Hey, Mom," he said casually, his voice so familiar yet so distant. It hit me like a punch to the gut. "John, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He paused, and I could hear him shift on the other end. "What about?" His voice was guarded, like he already knew what was coming. "I know what's been going on, John," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "I know about the money, about Rebecca's lies, about how you've let her control everything." There was a long silence. I could feel him trying to process my words. "What do you mean?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I mean that you've been pushing me out of your life, out of this family. And I'm not going to let it happen anymore," I said, my voice firm now, no longer trembling with uncertainty. "You're not the person I raised." The words stung, and I could feel the tears welling up behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had to stay strong. "I didn't mean for things to go this way," he said, his voice almost apologetic. "You've changed, John," I said, the bitterness in my words cutting through the air. "And it's not just Rebecca. You've let her take over. You've let her control everything. Even me." I waited for his response, but all I heard was silence. It was the silence I had feared, the silence that spoke volumes. Finally, he spoke again, this time with a quiet, defeated tone. "What do you want from me, Mom?" he asked, sounding so much like the boy I had once known. "I want you to stop letting her control you. I want you to see what's really going on. You've lost sight of who you are, and I'm not going to let you lose me too," I said, my heart heavy. The line went silent again. I could hear the sound of his breathing, the tension in the air thick and suffocating. "I don't know what to do," he said after a long pause. "You need to figure that out," I replied. "But know this, John. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not leaving. I'm not going to let you or Rebecca take away what's mine." Weeks went by, and the tension between John and me slowly began to shift. It wasn't easy, but the more time I spent standing my ground, the more he started to see things clearly. We didn't speak every day, but when we did, there was a new understanding in his voice. He wasn't dismissing me anymore. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally being heard. I could feel the change in him. The son I had raised was starting to come back. It wasn't an instant fix, and I knew it would take time for him to fully understand the depth of his mistakes, but it was a start. Rebecca, on the other hand, wasn't as easily swayed. She was defensive at first, unwilling to acknowledge the truth in the way I had hoped. But as the weeks passed, even she began to realize that I wasn't going to back down. She still kept her distance, but the coldness in her demeanor started to soften, even if just slightly. One evening, John came over to visit. It was the first time he had come to my house in months. He walked through the door, his face uncertain but determined. "Mom," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I was wrong and I want to make it right. I know I can't undo the damage I've caused, but I can start by being here for you. I should have been there all along, and I'm sorry." Hearing those words, I felt a weight lift off my chest. It wasn't perfect, and I knew there was still work to be done. But in that moment I realized something important. I hadn't lost him. He was still my son. It wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about our relationship, and that was something I was willing to fight for. "Thank you, John," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "I know it's not easy, and I know we've both made mistakes. But we still have time to make things better." From that day forward, things began to change. Slowly but surely we started to rebuild what had been broken. It wasn't just about confronting the betrayal. It was about rediscovering the love and respect that had always been there. As time passed, Rebecca began to acknowledge the role she had played in everything that had happened. It wasn't easy for her, but she came to understand that family couldn't thrive on manipulation and control. She began to make small gestures of kindness, reaching out to me in ways she never had before. And though our relationship was still strained, I saw hope. I saw the possibility of healing. And in the end, that was all I needed. We weren't perfect, but we were family, and that was enough.